Normally, I don't make videos discussing teams after 4 or 5 games, but the Milwaukee Bucks have been such a disaster that I had to make an exception. With an underwhelming record of 1-4, which is the worst start to a season that the franchise has seen in the Giannis era, an offense that is subpar, and a defense that is at the bottom of the league, the Bucks are far removed from where they need to be, especially at a point in time where there are several rumors circulating around Giannis, his future with the franchise, the lack of identity and cohesiveness with this team, and more importantly, the inability of this team making any significant changes to their roster that more than likely would address a lot of their concerns. And the biggest reason why I feel like I'm not overreacting is because the same problems that I've seen early on this season is the same thing I saw last year. It's basically a rerun. And also, when you lose to like the Brooklyn Nets, Chicago Bulls, and just last night, the Memphis Grizzlies in dominating fashion, when you lose like that, it definitely raises some eyebrows. So what exactly is wrong with Milwaukee? Well, first, the Dame and Giannis chemistry still isn't there. This is a problem that we saw last year as Dame and Giannis clearly were not on the same page, but many people were so optimistic that we would see it this year with there being a full offseason and training camp with the duo. But unfortunately, and I have no idea why, that was not taken to full advantage. News broke before the season even began that Dame and Giannis throughout the entire offseason never got together to practice with one another, to get some reps underneath their belt, to prepare themselves for the upcoming season, and it is very clear and prevalent. The Dame and Giannis pick and roll that many people thought was going to put fear into the NBA is still practically non-existent, as Lillard has opted into using Brook Lopez as his pick and roll or pick and pop partner, which in all honesty makes a lot of sense because Brook is a better screen setter, bigger body, and he just understands how to be more complementary in a lot of these sets. Where on the other hand, Giannis doesn't really put a body on the defender when he is setting a screen. He's constantly trying to slip and get to the basket and utilizing this as an opportunity for him to score rather than trying to set up Dame or some of his teammates, which is all disappointing because when it does work, great offense is being produced practically every single time. So you may be wondering, well, if we're not getting the Dame and Giannis duo, what exactly are we getting? Well, this is where the Doc Rivers conundrum comes into place. More or less, you're just getting the same rudimentary, very predictable offensive schemes every single time down. It's actually pretty scary. Dame and Giannis, when they are on the floor with one another, still very awkward, and it more or less feels like they're just trying to get out of each other's way instead of complimenting each other, and more or less they're just taking turns of who's going to deal with the offense on a possession-to-possession basis. Rather that's with isolation or just trying to dribble drive down to the basket and hope that the defense collapses so they can kick it out to a three-point shooter. And if they're not doing that, I kid you not, it's either pick and roll with Brook Lopez or post up with Bobby Portis. And the reason why I do blame Doc Rivers for a lot of this is because this has become a reoccurring theme throughout his coaching career. Doc heavily relies on talent instead of properly preparing his team and trying to execute to maximize everyone on the floor. And the easy identifiers of this is when Giannis is off ball, when Dame is operating the offense, and Giannis is infamously being put in the iconic Doc Rivers dunker spot. The same spot that Ben Simmons was placed in, the same spot that DeAndre Jordan was placed in, the same spot that practically every non-floor spacer is put in Doc Rivers offense where he doesn't know what to do with them. That's where Giannis is being placed 90% of the time when the ball is not in his hands. It's actually really disgusting. No screens being set, poor floor spacing, and overall a team that really lacks an offensive identity, which is why it's not that crazy for me to believe at all that Giannis feels this way only 4 games into the season. And again, it's reoccurring from last year. It's a huge reason why under Doc, the Bucks have a record of 18-22, which is a combined record of last year and so far this season as well. And it's also a huge reason why under Doc last year that the Bucks had an offensive rating that ranked 18th in the NBA. Now, some Bucks fans still may have a level of optimism with their offense. All it's going to take is a little bit more reps with Dame and Giannis. Doc Rivers could make an adjustment, especially when Chris Middleton is back and Prince is back on the bench. And in particular with the three-point shooting, I don't think it's going to be this bad for the remainder of the year. So far this season, the Bucks are shooting roughly 33% from behind the arc. Brook Lopez, Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis are all struggling mightily, and so is Dame. Now, as a sidebar though, because I do have to emphasize this because again, this is something that we talked about last year as well. The Damian Lillard conundrum is mind-blowing to me. Last season, I was a bit lenient because it's a new city, new teammate, new system. All of these things are new to Dame and some personal things behind the scene that may have really altered his psyche, his mental, and his confidence with his shot. And Doc Rivers came out and said that Dame wasn't properly training before the season began last year in fear of injury. So to be fair to Dame, I gave him a lot of leeway last season. However, so far this year, it's starting to be, again, very redundant, very repetitive, and very concerning. Dame was a player who was an all-time transcendent three-point shooter, and he is translated into one that has been below league average. Last season, he shot around 35-36% with the long ball on great volume, but so far this year, it is just evaporated. The volume is there, the accuracy isn't, and he is shooting basically 30% from behind the arc, and that's me rounding up for him. So again, I'm being optimistic that that's not who Dame is. I have a hard time believing that one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time can shoot below 30% and his three-point shot just vanishes within a 2-season sample size. I think that's crazy to believe, but I also don't believe that it's that crazy to come to a conclusion that this may be the new version of Dame and he just isn't as potent as he once was, in particular with his shot creation from deep. However, the one thing that people cannot deny about the Bucks, and in all honesty is probably the biggest concern that they have moving forward, is their defense. This year, the Bucks already find themselves towards the tail end of the pack in the league, and last year was very similar as they were bottom 10 status in the NBA, which is practically a complete 180 from when Coach Budenholzer was leading this team from a coaching standpoint, because the one thing that Coach Bud was able to hang his hat on consistently was the fact that he was able to lead this team to top 5 statuses defensively and peaked at all-time levels throughout certain postseason runs. Where that defense is gone is certainly attributed to the loss of Jrue Holiday. That is undeniable. However, I believe a much bigger reason why the team is struggling defensively is once more because of the lack of leadership from a coaching perspective. Sure, Brook Lopez is also older and Giannis is not the same defender that he once was as well, but there are just certain things that happen on the floor that quite literally does not make any sense. Doc Rivers is asking players to fight over not 1 but 2 screens, players who are poor screen navigators who have no business of doing so, and the switch would actually make way more sense than asking someone to fight over multiple screens in multiple possessions. 2, teams are becoming much more knowledgeable on how the Bucks employ Giannis as a roamer and someone who just completely blows up a lot of action. So what teams are starting to do now is constantly have a 3-point shooter on the floor so Giannis can't roam around as much. A lot of this can still be fixed by just certain defensive schemes and adjustments, but Doc just doesn't do that whatsoever. And third and finally, I'm just going to say this, Damian Lillard quite literally is one of the worst defenders I have ever seen in my life. Like, one of the worst that I've really harped on and focused. People love to kill players like Trae Young, John Morant, LaMelo Ball, Tyrese Halliburton, but for whatever reason, Damian Lillard consistently gets escaped from these conversations, which is crazy because he's actually on a contending team. And it's one thing to, again, ask him to just fight over multiple screens. It is another when he is denying switches routinely, even though it would aid everyone if he just made the proper switch and there can be a better understanding of where certain players are going to be on the floor. However, at the end of the day, it is still a massive personnel problem. Asking Gary Trent Jr. or Taurean Prince to be primary defenders on any ball club in the NBA certainly isn't going to work out in your favor, even with Giannis's backline help. And this is something that they're going to have to address sooner than later, but in all honesty, I don't believe they have the ability to do so. The Bucks are one of the very few teams that are over the second tax apron in this new CBA, which leaves them extremely limited on what they can or cannot do to this roster moving forward. And with Brook Lopez aging, Chris Middleton constantly in and out of the lineup, and Dame and Giannis not being on the same page with one another, it is very, very clear that it's not just an adjustment that needs to be made with 1 or 2 players. There is a lot to tackle with a ball club that is trying to compete for a championship, and they are nowhere near close to that, which inevitably leads us to why Giannis would force himself out of Milwaukee. Look, I am not falling for NBA Central or Legion Hoop tweets on Twitter about how Giannis is forcing himself out, or some beat writer on Yahoo Sports trying to get his fame off real quick because he wants to give some hot takes about how Giannis is forcing himself out within the next 6 months. No, I'm not doing that. However, I do believe we are at the end of the rope. There's only so much that this team can do without coming to the conclusion that maybe Giannis's time with the Bucks is coming to a conclusion anyway. And in this new CBA with a 34-year-old Damian Lillard making upwards to $58 million within the next 3 years, there just isn't enough that this team can do to make themselves better, so they have to improve internally. Even though I'm a fan of Giannis and I do believe the version of who Dame has been over the past 12 months may not be who he actually is, the panic button and the fact that people are willing to press it, all justified, because there's not that many options that the Bucks can really do moving forward. But hey, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the subscribe button and notification bell to be updated when I upload NBA content on this channel. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.